Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I look to start this week. The first guy, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Burrow got off to a slow start a little bit the first few games of the season, but the last two ball games he's played good football for the Bengals and fantasy owners. Week 3 at the Jets, 275 pass yards, 3 touchdowns in that one. In Week 4, in a nice victory versus the Miami Dolphins, 287 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 6 rush yards. So right here, Week 6 is a divisional matchup with the Ravens and the Bengals, and no love lost, no doubt about it. And this Baltimore team, a lot of teams, they just go up and down the field versus them. They give up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So I think Joe Burrow has another good game. Him and T. Higgins have been hooking up for big ball games. And Jamar Chase just has to get it going just a little bit right now to really get Joe Burrow's numbers up there. So if Chase could get on a path once again like he was last season, Joe Burrow, sky's the limit. But this week here, Baltimore in a potential shootout in a division matchup. He's definitely a quarterback I would start this week, and I could expect 25 to 30 fantasy points. Next guy's Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. So Rodgers, he wasn't that on in Week 4, but he still finished with 20 fantasy points. And now 3 games in a row where Rodgers has had 20 fantasy points plus in fantasy games. So right here, Week 5, a good matchup versus the New York Giants in the London ball game right here. And this Giant defense, they've been playing tough football and better football than they have in many seasons, no doubt about it. But I think Aaron Rodgers, obviously the savvy veteran, he's going to pick apart this defense. He's going to make some plays, and he's starting to connect with some new guys on this team. Romeo Doubs, he's looked pretty decent the last couple weeks here. Also, Robert Tonyan, he's been playing a good role with this Green Bay Packer team. And this Giant team, I don't think they could stop Aaron Rodgers in this one. Even though it's a London game, anything happens. We've seen it in London. But right now, Aaron Rodgers, he's getting things going. He's getting more comfortable with some of the younger receivers on the team. And I think, once again, he'll at least have 20 fantasy points plus this week versus the Giants. And he's a guy I would put in my starting lineup. Next quarterback's Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Bucks. Tom Brady had his best game of the season in terms of fantasy football, even though they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs 41-31, 385 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, and a fumble loss. And now Tom Terrific, he's going to take it out on a weak Atlanta Falcon defense here that gives up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Mike Evans, he had a monster ball game. Chris Godwin, he looked good in the game. Julio Jones played, but he's banged up once again after the game, Todd Bowles said. But as long as he has Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in the lineup here, is Tom Brady, he's good to go. And this Atlanta team, we see him getting torched week in and week out for the most part. So right here, Tampa Bay back home once again. Tom Brady, he's going to get this team on track. I know they're 2-2 off to a slow start, but right here in Week 5, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he finishes in the top 5 in fantasy points for quarterbacks this week. The next quarterback's Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. So what a beginning it's been for Jared Goff here. A guy that not many people or any people at all really drafted unless in the deepest of 2 quarterback leagues or 18-team leagues or something. So far this season, he's up there in the top 5 in fantasy points for quarterbacks is Jared Goff here. And the hottest pickup on the waiver wire this week at the quarterback position, no doubt about it. So this season, he's had at least 15 or more fantasy points in each of the ball games here is Goff. In Week 5, tough matchup, but still on paper a decent matchup at the New England Patriots that give up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So after coming off a 378 pass yard, 4 touchdown ball game with Jared Goff without his top receiver, Amon St. Brown, even though I know Seattle's secondary is horrible, it's a guy you got to pay attention to, and a guy that most weeks is going to be a starter in 12-team leagues, I think, throughout. So right here, Week 5 in New England, we know this Patriot defense is still gritty. We know they could still make some plays. They took the Packers to overtime in Week 4 here, but Jags are going to be solid for the rest of the way, I think, here, even though he's got a few tough matchups coming up in the next few weeks here after the bye week. But right here, Week 5 in New England, I think he could put up at least 20-plus fantasy points. And he's a quarterback right now. If he's on your roster, how could you really sit Jared Goff this week? And the 5th and final quarterback I look to start this week's Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Trevor Lawrence, he got off to a good start the first few games of the season. And then Week 4 was a fluky ball game, wet conditions, raining the whole day versus a good Philadelphia Eagle team in Philadelphia. 174 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, underneath those 7 rush yards and a fluky 4 fumble losses because of the wet weather. So right here, the few games before that, week 2 versus Indianapolis, 235 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 11 rush yards. And week 3 at the Chargers, 262 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, 7 rush yards, and 2-point conversion. So right here, week 5, pretty good matchup versus the Houston Texans. It looks like Zay Jones should be back in this ball game as well here for Trevor Lawrence and this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And Zay Jones, we know he's one of the main targets in this offense here. So after a bad ball game at Philadelphia, I think he bounces back, and he's a quarterback that'll probably be in my top 12 in rankings this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I look to start here for week 5 of the fantasy football season.